We are so excited to be here today to learn about one of the foundational parts of Wholespire, policy systems and environmental change. And we're thrilled to partner with USC SNAP Ed to provide today's training as they provide similar training to food policy councils around the state. This webinar is brought to you by Healthy Blue South Carolina, the official managed care organization of Wholespire. Just want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, and we'll post it on our website, wholespire.org, as soon as we can get that up there for all of you to revisit. Today, our speakers would love to hear from you. So if you have any questions at any time during the webinar, please use the chat to post your questions, and we will answer those questions for you at the end of the webinar. Also, if you have any examples of PSE change in your community, we would love to hear about those. It's an opportunity to share with everyone else who has joined us to learn about other PSE examples besides the ones that we're going to talk about today. At this time, I would like to introduce myself and our presenters for today's webinar. I am Brandy Freeman. I'm your facilitator today. I'm also the Marketing Communications Manager at Wholespire. Ashley Page Bookhart is a program coordinator with SNAP Ed at USC and provides technical assistance around policy system and environmental change strategies to several local food policy councils, libraries, and community gardens across the state. Ashley received her bachelor's degree from Converse College, now known as Converse University, and her master's in social work from the University of South Carolina. Zach Herrnstadt is also a program coordinator with USC SNAP Ed and provides training and technical assistance to communities interested in starting and sustaining local food policy councils rooted in equity and inclusion. Employing a food justice lens, he conducts community-based research and program implementation, examining the intersection of community food systems, food policy, and improving access to fresh, local, sustainably grown, and culturally appropriate food. Sorry, have to admit somebody. Kelsey Sanders is the Community Relations Manager at Wholespire. She works closely with the coalitions across the state to increase access to healthy choices through a PSE approach. She has worked in public health in South Carolina for nearly 10 years. She received her master's in public health at the University of Pittsburgh and her bachelor's degree from Michigan State University in nutritional sciences. So I am going to turn it over to Kelsey and let her get started with today's topic.
All right, thanks, Brandy. So just to give you guys a quick overview of today's webinar, if you were able to participate in the first part of this webinar series, we just really kind of focused on an overview of what is policy systems and environmental change, or PSE, and giving a couple of examples around the state of what that looks like. So today, as we build on that, we're going to really focus more on implementation. So what does it look like to actually implement PSE strategies? We're going to do that by focusing on two different case studies, two different examples of PSE implementation, one on healthy eating, one on active living. We're going to learn just some basic steps and important considerations of PSE implementation. Zach's going to do sort of an overview of that for us. And then lastly, we're really hoping to get some engagement from you guys. We would love to hear from you. What are some things that are going well with PSE implementation in your communities? What are some challenges that you're facing? What are some opportunities that you see? So we can kind of brainstorm about that together. So there'll be a couple opportunities throughout the presentation to share that. And then, as Brandy mentioned, please type questions into the chat as they come up when you're listening to today's presentation, and we will get to them at the end during a Q&A portion of today's webinar. So before we dive into that real focused approach on PSE implementation, we do want to start, in case you missed the first webinar, that's okay. And just with a refresher, if you did participate in the first one, of what is PSE and why do we take that approach? So this is the model that we used in the first webinar to describe that. So this is called the socio-ecological model. And what this does is helps us to visualize the different types of approaches that you might take to address health in your community. And there's lots of great approaches that can be taken, but I'm going to walk through the levels of this model and then talk about how that applies to PSE. So starting there at the bottom of the model is the individual level. That's our knowledge, attitudes, and skills. So when you are at an event that has food or drink, the choices that you make based on your own knowledge, attitudes, and skills are that individual level. So changing someone's knowledge or understanding of nutritious foods, that would be an individual level intervention. And then interpersonal is the next one. Those are our families, friends, social networks. So that would be kind of thinking about, when you are with your friends or family or social networks, are you more likely to do an activity that's more sedentary? Or are you the type that's maybe more likely to go for a walk together or a bike ride? There's nothing wrong with either one of those, but you can see how that interpersonal level does have an impact on our individual behaviors and our health as a whole. The next level up there is organizational. And so those are things like the organizations that we interact with in our lives. That could be for children, schools, it could be our workplace as adults, a faith-based organization or something like that. And so the cultures and the practices of those organizations also impact our health and our health behaviors. So if your workplace incentivizes having a gym membership and using that gym membership, you're more likely to participate and use the gym probably. And now if it's very difficult for you to take a break and go for a walk at your workplace, then it's harder for you to be healthy in your workplace. So organizational also has an impact on our health as well. The next level up there is our community. So thinking about even just the culture of your community, events sort of built around, let's say, unhealthy foods or just less active activities, and how that impacts our health as well. It could also be how your community is designed. Do you have a lot of walking paths? Do you have safe pedestrian crossings and things like that? Do you have a farmer's market in your community? And how that could impact our health as well. And then last but not least is the public policy. So those could be national laws, state, local, or even regulations within organizations. So these are all important ways that we might intervene to address health, but that PSE approach really gets at those top three layers of the socio-ecological model. So you can see how each of the layers wrap around the ones underneath it, and they get larger. So those top three layers are really considered more of a sustainable, higher impact approach. Oftentimes the layer above the layer below, that's hard to describe. So let's say public policy, for example, is at the very top. It tends to have an impact on all of those layers below it. It's harder to have an impact from the bottom up. So this, I think, is a helpful visual just as we think about PSE on what is it and why do we take that approach. It's absolutely not to say that that individual or interpersonal level isn't important. It's very important. So if that's the type of work you do, that is a critical piece of community health. However, this PSE approach is also considered very sustainable and long-term, and can ultimately help those individual and interpersonal levels as well. So they're complementary, they work hand in hand, but today we're going to talk about those top three layers of this model. So I'm going to turn it over to Zach, and he's going to get into a little bit of PSE implementation and some important things to consider as you do that.
Thanks, Kelsey. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today to share an approach you can take to implement PSE strategies in a sustainable way. And I find that it helps to break the process up into 5 steps. And those steps are listed over to the left on this slide. Identifying the PSE strategy, identifying and gathering collaborators within the community, identifying the physical location or the site where the PSE strategy will take place, planning and preparation for implementation, and then finally actually implementing the PSE strategy itself. So let's go ahead and walk through these 5 steps, and we'll be using a hypothetical example of starting a community garden. So this first step is to identify the PSE strategy. And I'd say that the most important part of this step is to make sure that the community members themselves are heavily involved in identifying the strategy. And our community garden PSE strategy is a great example of why this is so important. I've seen numerous examples of just impeccably constructed gardens that end up languishing and ultimately failing because there's little or no community buy-in for the garden. So I really encourage you to hold community listening sessions, focus groups, one-on-one discussions. There are a variety of ways I'm sure you're all familiar with to make sure that you're working towards PSE strategies that the community members themselves will actually find useful. So on to step 2, which is, you can see in this slide here, is to identify and gather potential collaborators within the community. It's important to bring collaborators from a wide range of sectors into the fold at the beginning of the process. But that being said, you also want to be conducting some strategic targeted outreach to help ensure that the right people are at the table. So let's go back to our community garden example for a second. And you're likely going to decide to reach out to a horticulturalist, a master gardener, or a farmer. But you also might want to involve the owner of a hardware store or a gardening center who could potentially donate items to build fencing and raised beds, things like that for the garden. Maybe you plan on donating excess produce from the garden. And if you're going to do that, then you're probably going to want to involve your local food pantry or members of the faith community. Maybe you held a listening session earlier in the process and there was interest among community members in involving children. And if that's the case, then you'd want, a teacher or administrator from the school district. And again, these are just examples, but hopefully they give you a feel for what I mean by strategic outreach to a wide range of sectors. So moving on, you'll likely want to work towards identifying the site of your PSE strategy, which is step 3, at the same time as you're identifying collaborators, as the two are definitely related. For our community garden example, maybe the city or the county has land they could donate. Maybe the public library is interested in being the site, and or perhaps a church or a nonprofit has land available. While I'm thinking about it, this picture here is actually one of our local food policy councils based in Greenwood that has started a number of community gardens around the community, and this is just one of them with some excited folks just getting their hands dirty for maybe the first time. And the previous picture I forgot to also mention was another one of our local food policy councils based in West Columbia and Casey, who have also been instrumental in starting up a number of community gardens in their area. So exciting work going on all around the state. But moving on to step 4, which is planning and preparation. This is when you will likely want to reconvene your core group of stakeholders and think through all the materials, the people, the tasks, as well as the processes that need to be in place prior to implementation of the PSE strategy. So the specifics of this step are going to obviously look quite a bit different depending on the strategy itself. But if we can go back to our example of a community garden, you'd probably want to focus on things like securing the materials necessary for the garden, identifying the individuals that would be actually building the physical structures that make up the garden, deciding on the qualification process for garden plots, designating a communications point person, coming up with an outreach strategy, things like that. So after all of that, we come to step 5, which is the implementation process itself. And much like step 4, the implementation process is going to likely look very different depending on the strategy that you're focused on. And depending on your situation, you yourself may be on the ground actually helping to implement the PSE strategies, or you might be like our local food policy councils, which are focused on providing technical assistance to those implementers. So things like helping them to troubleshoot, connecting them with experts from other communities that have already successfully implemented similar PSE strategies in the past, things like that. So now that I've gone through these 5 steps, I'm going to turn it back over to Brandy, who has a couple questions for us to discuss.
Thank you, Zach. Up next is Ashley Bookhart. She's going to talk about SNAP at the farmers market. But before we get to her, we would love to know if you have any examples of healthy eating PSE changes in your community. So please, if you do, put them in the chat, and then that might spark some additional conversation around those topics. So let's see, we have something in the chat. Jack Apple says, as an elementary educator, it is critical for me to model for students what healthy eating actually looks like. One way of doing so was working with my coaching teacher to begin a community garden for the school. It does not have to look pretty. Rather, we found a bunch of different containers and planted a variety of vegetables. The students were able to take a hands-on approach to growing their own healthy food at school. And with this experience and knowledge, the students were able to take their own seedling home to build their very own garden at home. That is a really good example of healthy eating PSE change within the school and how it can spill over into their home life. Would anyone like to build on that or provide any other examples? This is one of your opportunities. All right, so we are going to move on to Ashley Bookhart. And she's, like I said, she's going to talk about SNAP at the farmers market. Ashley?
Good morning, everyone, and thank y'all for joining the webinar. And so being that we're not officially in summer, but we're in the month of June, I'm sure many of you have visited a local farmers market in your community over the past few weeks. And so during that visit, some of you may have seen farmers who, had that SNAP machine set up to be able to accept SNAP as a method of payment. But also, I'm sure you all saw some farmers that sold items that are SNAP deemed eligible, but didn't receive or accept SNAP as a current method of payment. So just want to say, most of the times when you go to the farmers market, you see that farmers on an individual level accept SNAP, but going back to, kind of that systems approach that Kelsey mentioned earlier, there are a few farmers markets across the state, and a method that you can do to try to bring more equity and more variety of as far as payments, as far as items folks can get at the market, is having SNAP being accepted at the market as a whole. And so some of the things you definitely want to think about is, does your community already have an existing farmers market? And if so, does that market currently offer SNAP as a whole? If not, you can speak with community members to see if they would buy into moving to a SNAP at the farmers market as a whole model, or you can look at USDA food desert data to determine what market would be best to implement SNAP in your community. A few things I think you want to consider is to make sure that the market is located in an area that's accessible to members of the community, particularly community members who either receive SNAP or are SNAP eligible. And also, I know we don't have public transportation in all communities across the state, but if you do live in a community that does have public transportation, I think it's really important to make sure that that farmers market is on one of those public transportation lines. And so kind of next, once we've identified the strategy, then we go to identifying potential collaborators at the market. Oh, and so want to point out, these are 2 of the farmers markets in the state that currently is accepting SNAP at the farmers market as a whole. So one is a semi, I guess you can say, a more urban example, farmers market, one of those suburbs of Columbia. And then you can see on the right, the Barnwell County Farmers Market is also accepting SNAP at the market as a whole. And on top of just doing SNAP, as you can see kind of indicated, especially in the Barnwell flyer, they're also accepting Healthy Bucks. So not only are, SNAP recipients able to use their SNAP dollars at the market as a whole, but also get that additional benefits through Healthy Bucks as well. So now that we've identified kind of, where you may want to, have SNAP be accepted at a farmer's market in your community, the next step is trying to identify and gather potential collaborators for that strategy. And so, who are the stakeholders that need to be involved? The first place I would start, most of these farmers markets have a farmers market manager. And so, you want to make sure that they would have the capacity to be able to run that SNAP machine. So typically, when you're at that individual model where farmers are accepting it, they go directly to the farmer swipes it. Typically, when you see the SNAP is being accepted as a market as a whole, the market manager is the one who is managing accepting SNAP and then getting back with farmers and providing them that benefit at the end of the day when that farmers market is over. You also want to consider, is there fees to cover when it comes to machines? So you have some machines that have wires. There are some that are wireless. Sometimes you might can get machines for free, especially those that don't have wires. But oftentimes there is a fee to process those SNAP redemptions. So that's when you might want to reach out to folks such as the local government, local foundations, other potential funders to see, hey, we're trying to do this new innovative thing by bringing SNAP to the farmers market as a whole. Do you all have some funding or can help us find some funding to help cover that fee? Additionally, you want to make sure that you're reaching out to the farmers, potentially new farmers that are going to be selling at the market to make sure, that they're bought in early, because maybe there's some farmers that currently don't, accept SNAP, and they may do so for a particular reason. And so you want to make sure that they're bought in to, this new process that'll be coming to the farmers market. But also there's a multitude of resources available to help you and the team that's put together to help bring SNAP to the farmers market. You have such organizations as the South Carolina Association of Farmers Markets, the National Farmers Market Coalition, local community groups Zach alluded to, food policy councils, you got Wholespire chapters, and a host of other variety of resources. But also, I indicated 2 farmers markets that are already accepting SNAP. Both of those market managers would be more than happy for you to reach out to them to kind of pick their brain to see if they can provide any additional advice to you as well. And now, so when you kind of look at the planning and the preparation stage, you want to make sure that you talk with stakeholders to receive that buy-in. But now you're ready to apply to USDA to become an authorized SNAP retailer. And so you want to make sure that when you do that application, that the market has to be operating. So say if your market season is April to October, you don't want to do that application in February because someone has to come out and inspect the farmers market. So you have to make sure the market is in operation when you do that application. And it's usually about a 30-day or so process. It can be a little bit shorter than that sometimes, depending on how many folks they're working with. It can be a little bit longer, but typically it's within that 30-day range of getting that approval process to accept SNAP at the farmers market. And so once you reach out and trying to get that help, definitely I think an important part is to make sure also customers are bought in and understand the importance of not going from an individual farmers accepting SNAP, but accepting SNAP as a whole. So I think key things to promote is that it promotes equity for all customers at the market. This can increase profits for farmers. So maybe some individuals who, are SNAP recipients would want it to shop at the farmer's market or would want to shop with a particular farmer, but could not because they currently weren't accepting SNAP at the time. And also it can increase the amount of customers that come to the farmers market, especially if you're promoting this with various community partners. And then kind of when you look at the, providing the technical assistance portion, once SNAP has been implemented at the market, you want to continue to support, because there are going to be many, many, many folks needed to continue to champion why we need to continue to have SNAP be accepted at the farmers market as a whole. Support with outreach and evaluation may be something that the farmers market manager may want to lean on you or the entire group to help with. I think the key is having some of those regular check-ins to talk about things that are working well, to talk about potential challenges, and talk about ways that we can enhance the experience, particularly for customers who are coming to spend those SNAP dollars at the farmers market. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Brandy. She has a few additional questions for us today.
I do. Thank you, Ashley. In the chat, we have 2 comments I just want to bring up since we are talking about healthy eating right now. Live Well Georgetown Coalition has implemented the Gardens for Educators program in early learning centers throughout the county. Clemson Extension altered some aspects of their program to fit the needs of preschool teachers. So we consider this to be a policy change along with the changes embraced by the preschools, welcoming gardens into their outdoor spaces and infusing lesson plans into their early learning curriculum. Thanks for sharing that, Connie. And then Deborah followed up, yes, through the faith-based community, I've been able to get several churches to host the Cooking Matters program, and lately the Walk with Ease program. Both are taught by Clemson University SNAP Ed, health and nutrition educator. Recently, we have been successful in getting the healthy eating and cooking program in a homeless facility. That's fantastic, which has residents that typically stay in their re-education program for at least 1 year. That's really good. That's reaching out to a new audience, pretty much, expanding your reach. It's a good thing. Thank you, Deborah, for sharing that. And we can definitely come back around to those examples later on if our speakers want to address that. I will say that Clemson Ed does do SNAP Ed, and they are doing some really great work around community gardens in rural communities. So definitely want to acknowledge their work here. All right, so before Kelsey Sanders tells you about a trails example, again, we want to know if you have any examples of physical activity or active living PSE changes in your community. So please, again, feel free to share those examples in the chat, and I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey.
All right, thank you, Brandy. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about an example of PSE implementation, and for physical activity, we're going to talk a little bit about trails. So trails can be a great resource in our communities, both rural and urban. Oftentimes they're free, so sometimes there's an exception to that, but in general, most of the times trails are a free resource to a community. An added bonus is that it gets people outside, which we know is also really good for our health, physical and mental. And so that's kind of what we're going to focus on today for physical activity. So often the selection and the first step of PSE implementation, identifying your PSE strategy, often that strategy selection begins with reviewing data. So looking at that data to identify the needs of your community. And let's say one of those identified needs was increasing access to physical activity. So there's plenty of strategies that would address this, but trails are a way of doing so that, like I said, is often free for the public. And it gets you outdoors and sometimes even in nature. Trails can be both urban and rural, like I said. So sometimes they're in a more natural setting, and sometimes they come right through a city, and which is also great. So that is the first step. And then second, and very important, as you've heard from Zach and Ashley, is to identify and gather those potential collaborators in the community. So this is a really critical part of PSE implementation. We always want to be mindful that there may be other people or other partners in the community that are already working on the strategy. So when you're in a room and you've just looked at the data, identified that you need more access to physical activity in your community, trails comes up and everyone is so excited. That's a great thing, but we always want to pause before we jump into just doing, to ask, to look to your right and your left and to ask, who's already doing this work in my community, and how can we make sure that we are enhancing or elevating existing work rather than duplicating it or even overstepping into someone else's lane. This is a really important part of building trust in our communities. Most people who are interested in community health and improving community health, they're in it for the long haul. And so taking these steps and taking the time to gather your collaborators and your partners into one room and asking questions like, what is the work that you're doing right now? And is there anything that we can do to help support it? What challenges are you facing and how can we help address that? Those are things that help in the long run really build trust and also increase access to healthy choices. So it's a win-win situation to just hit the brakes for a minute before we jump into creating a new trail, to look around and ask who's already doing this. So a few partners that you might consider right off the bat when it comes to trails is your local Parks and Rec. That could, depending on your community, it could be city or county level. Always want to engage your community members or a local coalition or food policy council. I also wanted to share, this is a fairly new resource for us in South Carolina, but there's a newly formed coalition called the SC Trails Coalition, and that is a state level coalition, and they are looking at specifically trails awareness and expansion in South Carolina. And so they are a great place to start if you're interested in trails in your community, is to reach out to them. They could also help you to identify if there's already a group in your community that is working on trails. So I know there's the Lawrence County Trails Association that's working in Lawrence. PAL is up in Spartanburg working on trail connectivity in Spartanburg County. And I'm sure that there's others across the state that you may know of. But if you're just getting into trails in your community, they would be a great first step and they can also offer some support in how to implement trails in your community. All right, so next you want to identify the site for your PSE strategy. So for many PSE strategies, these steps 2 and 3, they tend to happen at the same time, so that's okay. But once you have your partners at the table, have the right voices in the conversation, you want to identify your site. So there's some things to consider with that. So is there an existing trail that could use some upkeep or promotion? Because working on a strategy like trails could look like a lot of different things. It could look like creating a brand new trail, but it could also look like improving or expanding an existing trail. It could look like cleaning up an existing trail or adding some amenities to make it more interesting. Something like a story walk it has been done around our state as well, that just draws more people to use an existing trail. Is there a part of your community that has indicated that they're interested in trails in their area? Or maybe there's a specific area that is really lacking in physical activity resources that would be a good fit. You can also, if you're not familiar with the trails in your community, I wanted to share sctrails.net is a great site to look at. You can pull up your county and see what trails exist in your county. And you might find some that you didn't know existed. So definitely recommend checking that out as well. So there's, like I said, lots of different ways to approach trails in your community. But we just want to make sure that you kind of come to an agreement with the partners at the table on what's the best fit for your community. All right. So next thing you want to do is get into that planning and preparation. So this is a great time to develop an action plan, to come up with your specific action items. So if you've decided to increase the use of or improve an existing trail, coming up with the task list in order to do that. So is it cleaning up the trail? Have you identified some specific needs of that trail? Like maybe it's mile markers or signage to make it more visible. Apply for funds if that's necessary. If you already have funds, you can move forward without that, but apply for funds if you need them. If a work day is necessary, you can do that. And also raising awareness of trails. Those are some other things that you might want to consider in your planning and preparation is raising awareness. And that could be using social media, even interviews with your local radio station or news channel, just whatever makes the most sense for your community, but really getting the word out. It's great to do the work, but it's also even more important or just as important to communicate that work so that it can really be utilized by the community. And the last part of implementation is providing that technical assistance during the implementation process and even afterward. So providing support during and after implementation is another important part of being a good partner. Having conversations about who will maintain a trail and being available to address challenges that may arise throughout the process, they'll go a long way in the success of your project. So take time to ask what issues that Parks and Rec may be seeing at a trail. Are there any issues with littering? And what is the reason behind that? Is it because there's no trash cans? And is that something that you and your partners could help to address? Can the trail be more inclusive by adding places to sit, to stop and rest? That can be a really important part of getting access to physical activity of people with all ability levels. And so just really being a part of the conversation, not just implementing the trail or cleaning it up, taking the picture and moving on. But again, thinking about long-term, becoming a trustworthy resource in your community. And this is all a part of that, being a good partner and being a part of not just getting it started and that exciting early stages, but being a part of the technical assistance throughout implementation and even after. So these are all really important things to consider. Be willing and available to brainstorm solutions to address any challenges that may come up. So that's all I have for trails, and would love to answer any questions that might have arisen during the presentations today. And we'll turn it over to Brandy to get to the questions.
Thank you, Kelsey. And thank you, Ashley and Zach as well. There's some good conversation going on in the chat if you haven't had time to look at it as of course you're speaking. On physical activity, let's see, I'm going to go back up. Jack says one way of including physical activity changes into the classroom, specifically during writing workshops. We will do walk and talks outdoors or around in school halls. Students will partner up and will walk around brainstorming and sharing ideas about a variety of writing prompts. This gives students an opportunity to move around and leave the classroom rather than sitting at their desk or within the confined classroom all day. That's great. Yeah, like outdoor classrooms are fantastic ways, just getting out, enjoying the outdoors. Is a great way to change things up and get them moving. Deborah says, I agree, Jack. When I taught, I used to have activities that included a gallery, walk around the classroom and or the nearby hallway, either to view and comment on other students' work or as a scavenger hunt. Ooh, the goal was to get them out of their seats and to move around. Oh, wow, that's a really great idea. Hannah says, I've partnered with a couple of public libraries to create a physical activity equipment checkout program. Much like checking out books, the guests of the library can check out PA equipment for a set amount of days. This allows guests to try out new sports like pickleball before buying the equipment. Also, providing an opportunity to get active that he or she may not have otherwise. The Anderson Library provided a book on pickleball next to the checkout equipment, combining both literacy and an access point in communities to get active. That That's really great. Combining literacy and physical activity, that's one way to do it. Another example of combining literacy and physical activity is a story walk. And Kelsey, I may need you to jump in on this one. I cannot remember the Marion County, I believe, the Marion County Library. They actually applied for a Hill Mini Grant through us, and we awarded them the Hill Mini Grant to improve their story walk. It's the trail through Marion, and it has little kiosks set throughout the trail featuring pages of a book. So you read a page, you move on, you read another page until you're actually reading a whole book. And it's not a very long book. It's children. I think theirs are focused on children reading, but it's a great way to get the family outdoors and read at the same time. Thank you all for the conversation in the chat. I've really enjoyed seeing that, and hopefully it has sparked some ideas. Oh, May 20th, First Steps had a storybook walk in Greenwood. Oh,
awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. So yeah, if at this time we're going to take some more questions and answers or some examples and stories. So please feel free to share it in the chat. And while we're waiting on you guys to do that, I'm going to take this opportunity. First, Kristen, First Step Saluda also installed a story walk in late April. That's fantastic. And I believe there's a department at USC School of Medicine that is working on story walks in particular. I don't want to say for sure, but you hear things when you're not included on conversations, which is fine. Yeah, so story walk seems to be a very interesting point for physical activity in the public health world right now. Yeah, so I just want to take this opportunity to let you guys know about some upcoming professional development opportunities. Wholespire is hosting a Lunch and Learn webinar series. It's starting June 28th at noon with Continuum of Collaboration with Pam M. These are free webinars. They're going to be monthly, primarily the fourth Wednesday of each month. And this is something that we're going to do until we realize that it's not working, which hopefully will never happen. So this is a continuing new thing for us. This first set of webinars will feature some content that was planned for the collaborative event that we had to cancel earlier this year. So we realized there were some better ways to get this information and content out to all of you through webinars. So registration for the June 28th webinar will open soon. You can get more information and see the schedule of webinars on our website. We have a new feature called the events calendar. So that's where you will find the registration link once it is ready and additional information. Let's go back to the chat real quick. Hannah wants to know how do you evaluate the impact of story walks, like capturing the number of individuals using the story walk?
Yeah, and I saw someone Connie responded in the chat as well, which I think is a great suggestion. So a lot of times with the story walk, you can include a QR code at the beginning of the walk so people can scan it. And that can give you some quantitative data, which I think can be really impactful. Also, it depends on what type of data you're looking for as well. I think too, a lot of times when it comes to park improvements and trail improvements, you can do things like a trail counter to try to get the number of use that wouldn't necessarily speak specifically to the story walk. But another thing that we've done in the past is to, if the trail is kept or maintained by, let's say, the Parks and Rec department, is to talk to them and see what they've observed in their time out at the trail. And so that's not quite as quantitative. They can't necessarily give you numbers of people, but you can ask questions about, what they've seen. Have you seen more families out there? And so you could ask them ahead of time, like, hey, we're going to add this story walk. Could you just keep an eye out and let us know what you see? Do you see more families out there and things like that? So again, that's not quite as quantitative, but a lot of times those key informant interview type of evaluation can still be really valuable, because ultimately in this type of work, we really do want the full picture. We want numbers, but we want to know that people's lives are improved, that our community is healthier, and that can often be told through that qualitative approach as well. So I think that can be a really good thing to do as well when it comes to evaluating a story walk specifically. You could also, if you've got a school, like a college or university in your community, grab some interns and go out to the story walk trail for a day and just see if you can't interview some people. That takes more time and effort, certainly, but just grabbing an interview from somebody who uses the trail can be really helpful. You can also identify those people sometimes through your Parks and Rec staff who maintain the story walk. They might be able to tell you, oh, this family comes out, every week at this time or whatever. So that's often how we can get to the story and the impact behind this type of intervention, because it can be hard to measure. So I think it does go back to the value of relationships and partnerships, because people are much more willing to help you if you have been a trustworthy partner. So just kind of goes back to that as well. And Zach and Ashley, feel free to add your thoughts on that if you have any.
No, I think you did a good job summarizing that. Yeah. Thanks, Kelsey.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Again, thank you everyone for contributing in the chat and sparking conversation and ideas. At this time, I'm going to let Kelsey take over.
Okay, so the last thing we wanted to share today, besides our continuing our webinar series over the summer, is that we do have currently, Wholespire has mini grants that are open. So you can apply for funds up to $6,000, and they must address healthy eating and or active living. And they also must be a policy, system, or environmental change. So the last two webinars have been about PSE. So if you need a refresher, all the things that we talked about today, trails, SNAP at the farmers markets, community gardens, those are all eligible for funding through these mini grants. So hopefully that sparked some ideas for you. We, like Brandy said, we have funded a story walk in the past. So please take advantage of this opportunity. Any community coalition, organization, municipality, school can apply for these funds. So we would love to see some applications from your communities to address healthy eating, active living in your community. So you can find all the information on our website. We have a few minutes. So if you have questions about the mini grants, I'm happy to answer them right now as well. But it's great timing if you're interested in PSE around HEAL. So thank you all so much for coming today and participating in our webinar. We really appreciate your time.